We are joined now by Sally Yates, who worked at the Justice Department for more than 2 decades, from 2015 to early 2017. She served as the Deputy Attorney General. And then for 10 days last January, Yates served as the Acting Attorney General until the Trump administration fired her over her refusal to defend the president's first travel ban. Sally Yates, welcome to the NewsHour.
Thank you for having me.
So you made a stand. It was over a year ago. You said you were not going to defend the first travel ban. We're now at the third version of that travel ban. The justices are taking a look at it. Could you defend this one?
Well, they've made some important changes to this travel ban. I think the president has described this travel ban as a watered-down version of the first one. And for example, in the first travel ban, it applied to people who were lawful permanent residents and had valid visas. And I don't think anyone would seriously contend today that that's constitutional. There were no waivers for individuals, as they discussed at great length today. There was no national security process. They've jumped through a lot of those hoops now and made a number of important changes. But I think you still have to ask yourself, is this travel ban infected by the same animus that infected the first one? And that is the intent to discriminate on the basis of religion. The president's intent to effectuate a Muslim ban as best he could.
And if you were the justices, how would you come down?
Well, you know, I'm a careful lawyer. I haven't studied this one in the same way that I have the first one, but I'm really concerned about that. And I would have to be convinced that somehow there is a different intent here, that it's not something just dressed up better. And so far, I'm not convinced. But I haven't studied this in the same way I did the first ban.
Well, we invited you here because you have been spending a lot of your time recently looking at the importance of the independence of the judiciary. You're sponsoring a conference on that subject tomorrow. And I want to ask you about that, and I also want to ask you about some news that we've just learned about, and that is that the president's attorney, Michael Cohen, his lawyer has informed a court in California that Cohen will assert his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself in any matter involving Stormy Daniels, Stephanie Clifford, the woman who alleges she had an affair with President Trump. Hearing that, what does it tell you, if anything, about the course of those cases?
Well, it's a course reversal of sorts, and that from news accounts, he's been saying that there was nothing inappropriate with respect to that. And to assert the Fifth Amendment, you have to have a good faith basis to believe that the truthful answers to those questions would incriminate you in a crime. So that's what he's saying by saying he would take the Fifth.
So it says something to you about whether he knows something or not.
Well, it certainly is an indication of that, yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. And again, I want to give you a chance first to speak broadly about the importance of an independent judiciary, as you put it. Why is that important to you?
Well, you know, there are a lot of important policy issues confronting our country right now. But from my perspective, the most important issue isn't any one of those. You know, people of goodwill can have different views about the best policies. It's really the assault on our democratic institutions and norms, and that includes an independent judiciary and the rule of law and a free press, among others.
And you've said that some of that, of course, your concern grows out of this administration. The president's repeated concerns that he's expressed about the Robert Mueller the investigation into whether there was a connection with Russia during the election. Yeah. What is it about what the president said that most concerns you?
Well, it's what he's been saying almost since day one here. You know, for the rule of law to actually have any meaning in our country, we have to ensure that there is a division between the Department of Justice and the White House. And really, in going back administrations, Republican and Democratic alike, at least since Watergate, there's been essentially a wall between DOJ and the White House on criminal investigations and prosecutions. Not broad policies, but on those, both to ensure that those decisions aren't politicized and to ensure that the public has confidence that they're not politicized. Here, from the very first day, the president's done everything from repeatedly calling for the jailing of his former political rival, reaching into the department to try to squelch investigations of Mike Flynn or Sheriff Arpaio, even recently as last week, tweeting that essentially that the citizens of this country shouldn't have any confidence in people who are cooperating with the government because they'll just make something up to essentially save their skins. That's a remarkable thing for the president to say about his own Justice Department.
He has, and you've also spoken about his criticism of Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who of course appointed Bob Mueller. There have been some suggestions the president might fire him, and yet it hasn't happened yet. The White House keeps saying, no, it hasn't happened. The president has no intention. Should that set people's mind at ease that the White House is saying it's not something the president plans to do?
Well, it seems like we repeatedly get right up to the precipice of the president firing somebody at DOJ, whether it's the Attorney General or trying to shame him into resigning, or Rod Rosenstein, or the special counsel Mueller. From news reports anyway, last week he backed off of it once he had been assured that he was not the target of the Cohen investigation. You know, that ought to worry us even more, that his decisions here are situational, based on whether he feels like he's in the sights of the Justice Department. That's not how the rule of law is supposed to work.
One of the arguments the White House has made, Sally Yates, is that, in fact, there are a number of people who voted Democratic, who are favorable to Democrats, who are working with Robert Mueller. One of them, Andrew Weissmann, one of the top prosecutors, this has been reported. He sent you an email after you made the statement that you would not defend the first travel ban. He was complimentary of you. He said, "I'm so proud. I'm in awe." I guess the president's argument is, well, if there are people who were already disposed not to like me and to agree with the other side, then how can I expect them to treat me fairly?
Well, you know, I think that Mr. Weissmann's email was saying that he was gratified that the department was acting in a way that he believed was consistent with the law and the Constitution. That's how we should want prosecutors to think.
And let's talk about the Department of Justice. The people, you are still in touch with people at the Department of Justice. How are they working through this, and what do you think their reaction would be if we see some attempt to disrupt this investigation?
Well, you know, this has been a really hard time for the folks at DOJ, and that's been one of the things that's concerned me the most. You know, these are hardworking, diligent people who are trying to call it like they see it, based on the facts and the law and nothing else. And remarkably, they have a president lobbing assaults at his own Department of Justice on an almost weekly basis, putting justice in quotes when in one recent tweet, and calling them shameful and an embarrassment. The FBI is in tatters. You know, that's really hard when that's coming from the President of the United States. But I also have confidence that those folks are so committed to doing the right thing there that they're going to keep their nose, their head down and just try to do their jobs. But it certainly does have an impact on public confidence in the Justice Department and our criminal justice system. And that's a crime in and of itself.
Final question quickly about James Comey. We know this is part of the Mueller investigation, at least we believe it is. He wrote in his book, and we're going to be talking to him next week, among other things, that he let you know that he was going to make an announcement toward the end of the 2016 presidential election that the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails had been reopened, that you let him know you disagreed with that decision, but that you didn't tell him not to or urge him not to. Do you think, in retrospect, you should have done something different?
Well, that's a matter that right now is under investigation by the Department of Justice Inspector General. He's looking at Director Comey's actions in that regard, and while there's a pending investigation, I'm not going to comment on that.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Yeah. Sally Yates, former Acting Attorney General. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.